Glenn, thank you so much for being with us today. You have tens of thousands of people in your Garabandal group, let alone the hundreds of thousands around the world who are going to be watching this. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Can you start off by telling us a little bit about what is Garabandal and give us a brief description of the history of the apparitions?
Sure. Garabandal is a town in northern Spain. For 4 consecutive years, from 1961 through 1965, the Blessed Mother appeared to 4 girls. Average age was about 12. And it all started on June 18th, 1961, when the girls were out in an apple orchard playing, and they heard a thunderclap and they saw an angel. And they obviously were terrified and ran home and told their parents. And immediately the parents reacted like most parents and said, "You're staying in, you're punished." You can't come home making up these stories. But the problem was that in the next 12 days, it turned out it was St. Michael. He appeared 8 more times. And then on July 1st of 1961, he announced that the next day, Blessed Mother would appear as Our Lady of Mount Carmel, and she did. And what happened is every time Mary would appear to the girls, they would have 3 interior calls, or they called them joys. So Mary seemed to appear a lot at night. So if they were sleeping, they would get one initial call. That would be the first indication she was coming. Then they'd receive a second, and by the third, the girls would all collectively meet outside, and she would appear. And whenever Mary appeared, the girls immediately fell into an ecstatic state. And what that means is basically they were impervious and unaware of the surroundings around them. All they did was focus on Mary. And when Mary appeared, even that area is a very rocky mountainous area. The girls would fall to their knees on these big jagged rocks, and the people started to take notice and say, how could they not feel the pain? There was no reaction when they would hit the ground, when they would hit these rocks. So that was one of the first early indications that this was miraculous, because they never showed any sign of pain or injury. And Mary, over the course of the 4 years, left messages, but she left 2 main messages, one for then and one for the future.
Are all 4 visionary girls still alive?
Unfortunately, no. Mary Lowly Maison passed at age 59 in April of 2009 from lupus. But Mary Cruz is still alive. Mary Cruz still lives in Spain, and I believe it's Avia, Spain. Jacinta Gonzalez lives in California, and the main visionary, Conchita Gonzalez, lives right here in New York on Long Island.
Tell us a little bit about your role in the Garabandal apostolate. How did that come about?
It's a little bit of a long story, but it starts out really with Joey Lamangino. Joey is 16 years old. He's working on his uncle's ice truck. He's filling up a flat tire, and the tire explodes, and the rim hits him in the forehead, severing all of his olfactory nerves across his forehead. And he loses his sense of smell and goes blind. And he goes into a coma for 3 months. And he wakes up miraculously on the Feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, interestingly enough. So after many years, he's still working, and he's getting very tired, and his family suggests that he go on a vacation in Italy. And while he's in Italy, one of his uncles brings him to Padre Pio for confession. And this is in 1961. And you know the story of Padre Pio. He was able to read souls. So he basically tells Joey all of the sins that he's committed. And, Joey is obviously shocked and surprised. But getting this great grace, he changes his life. And 2 years later, 1963, Joey goes back to see Padre Pio again for confession. And then after that, he sees him and Padre Pio touches Joey on the forehead over his nose, and Joey immediately jumps back because he smells roses, and he hasn't smelt anything since he was 16 years old. It's technically impossible because the nerves are severed. It's like cutting wires to a lamp. It's impossible. So once he receives this great grace, in their conversation, he asked Padre Pio, "I understand that there is Mary is appearing in Spain. Is this true?" And he says, "Yes, it is true." He says, "Should I go?" And he says, "Sure, why not?" So Joey goes to Garabandal, and this is his initial meeting with the four girls. But he seems to kind of hit it off with Conchita, the closest, her being the main visionary. And when he returns home, his uncle had taken photographs while they were in Garabandal, and he put them in a photo album for Joey, and with Braille captions. And Joey literally would start by going door to door, and anybody who would listen to him, he'd open up the photo album and read the Braille caption and talk about Garabandal. So it's now 1973. I'm in a town football league, and I have a problem with my legs. The harder I try to run, the faster I try to run, the more difficulty I have. And so my mother takes me to the doctor, I get x-rays, and they discover that there's a bone marrow disease starting. And several weeks after that, one of my aunts, who lived in Lindenhurst, where Joey lived in his parish, invited Joey over to her house to speak about Garabandal. And so we understood that Padre Pio had already approved Garabandal, so we felt it was no problem going and listening to him. And after his talk, he broke out like a 2-inch large medal that the Blessed Mother kissed. And the Blessed Mother promised Joey that people who venerated this medal could receive prodigies, could receive miracles. So I venerated the medal, and several weeks later, went back to the doctors, and the bone disease was gone. So my aunt, who lived in Lindenhurst, also had a neighbor, and the two of these ladies, my aunt Angelina and her friend Ann, it kept encouraging people to invite Joey in, so this apostolate started to grow. Now it's 20 years later. It's now 1993, and the neighbor, Ann, her oldest son, Peter, and I became very good friends over the years because the two families were close. And Peter invites me to go hear some blind guy speak about a Marian apparition in Lindenhurst. And I'm like, well, all right, I'll go with you. What do I got to lose? And as soon as I walk in, it's Joey Lamangino, and he has a face that you can't forget because of the scar on his forehead from the injury. And I tell Peter immediately, I know this guy. I had a healing 20 years ago from this medal. And so we listened to the whole lecture that he gave, and I waited till everybody was gone, and Peter and I went up. We started talking to Joey, and Joey was a very vivacious person, great sense of humor, and I just kind of hit it off immediately. And I said, I work late afternoons and nights. I said, I'd love to come here at the New York Center and donate some time. So he was thrilled, and I was thrilled. So I literally got to work with him every day for years, which was an enormous blessing. So after about 2 years of helping at the center, and then I started doing talks also for Joey at anybody's house or any church that would invite me in. He asked me to be the director of public relations for Our Lady of Mount Carmel. So I wanted to do something in addition to what we were doing, which was small talks and selling books. And Joey had the idea of making a video of the Garabandal stories. I said, wow, this would be great. We can do so much more with a video. And in 1995, after the video was finished, I decided to contact all of the major networks and see if I could get it on television, and they all rejected it. But I tried one last time with Mother Angelica down on EWTN, And I wrote them every week for 6 months, the president of the company, Bill Steltemeyer. And this poor man finally called up Joey and said, please tell Glenn to stop writing me a letter every week. It says, you can come on the show. You can come on just once. And Joey was invited to talk on Mother Angelica Live. And that show wound up becoming the highest rated show. And then the video just exploded around the world because Joey had it transcribed into 26 languages. And then in 2009, I had approached Joey and Conchita and said, this internet is mind-boggling, the amount of people we can reach while I'm sitting at home instead of coming down here and mailing out books and videos. I can reach so many more people in a day. So I got their permission with certain guidelines, and I started a Facebook page called The Message of Garabandal. And on that page, I answer questions every day for a large portion of the day, about 16 hours a day. But it's a great resource because I've amassed about 600 files on Garabandal information. And also, I have the great advantage and blessing of being friends with Conchita. So it's the only site on the entire internet that has access to Conchita. So that's kind of my short story.
Wow, incredible. So let's talk about Garabandal. Why do you think our Blessed Mother chose here, of all places, to appear?
It's an amazing town. First of all, it's a really remote mountain town, and its simplicity. This is a town that only had electricity a few hours a day. So it's a very simple townspeople. They're very faithful. Garabandal is one of the few places I've ever heard of that had a 500-year nightly history of doing the rosary. So I don't know too many towns that can say that. And one of the most interesting quotes from Mary herself was that this was sacred ground, this mountain area that had 9 pine trees. And Mary's quote was actually, God loves this place so much. This is sacred ground. So that's pretty special.
Absolutely. And did our Blessed Mother, did she leave any messages for humanity?
Yeah, she left 2 main messages, and I'm going to read them to you because I want them to be quoted exactly. The first one is on October 18, 1961. We must make many sacrifices, perform much penance, and visit the Blessed Sacrament frequently. But first, we must lead good lives. If we do not, a chastisement will befall us. The cup is already filling up. And if we do not change, very great chastisement will come upon us. Now, the second message she gave was on June 18th, 1965, her last message. As my message of October 18th has not been complied with and has not been known to the world, I am advising you that this is the last one. Before, the cup was filling up. Now it is flowing over. Many cardinals, many bishops, and many priests are on the road to perdition, and they're taking many souls with them. Less and less importance is given to the Eucharist. You should turn the wrath of God away from yourselves by your efforts. If you ask for his forgiveness with sincere hearts, he will pardon you. I, your mother, through the intercession of Saint Michael the Archangel, ask you to amend your lives. You are now receiving the last warnings. I love you very much and do not want your condemnation. Pray to us with sincerity, and we will grant your requests. You should make more sacrifices. Think about the passion of Jesus.
Incredible. 2 powerful messages. Now, were these the only messages that Mary left?
No, during the course of the 4 years, there were almost daily lessons and messages for the girls. And the first one was always a valid sign of a Marian apparition, is Mary talking about the rosary. So she always stressed the importance of the rosary And it was actually the first thing that she actually taught the girls. So the townspeople were kind of amazed because the girls are about 11 and 12 years old, were not taught the rosary, and yet they're reciting the rosary fully without being taught it. So that was kind of one of the first miracles that she actually performed. So she not only stressed the rosary, she stressed to the girls humility, piety, modesty, a reverence for priests, the importance of the Eucharist, and probably one of the most important things that got overlooked was obedience. And Mary stressed obedience so much that she told the girls, "You obey me. I'm sorry. You obey the bishop over me." She said, "You obey your parents over me." So sometimes the parents didn't let the girls go to a calling. They had to obey that. And the most interesting thing that happened during these lessons of obedience was the girls started to draw such large crowds around them during these ecstatic states that they were going into the church. They thought it was better and maybe holier to have this apparition in the church. But so many people crammed the church that the bishop said, "I don't want you going in the church anymore. You're gonna damage the church." Now the Blessed Mother obviously doesn't have to take any suggestions from anyone, but she obeyed the bishop and told the girls, "Leave the church, and the furthest we'll go is the door." That's the closest she would bring them to for an apparition, was the doors of the church. But even she obeyed the bishop to make a point to the girls how important obedience is. And the last thing that she kind of stressed, which I read in the message, was, above all, lead a good life.
And I think some of the most popular topics about Garabandal is the 3 prophesied future events that Mary referred to. Can you walk us through those?
Sure. The 3 prophesied events are, in chronological order, the warning, the miracle, and the conditional chastisement. Now, the warning, people ask me all the time, when is this warning going to happen? And I said, we were given 3 indications of a relative time period when this is going to happen. And the first clue was a church synod. Now, interestingly enough, we had a synod last year in 2019. Is that the one before the warning? I can't say 100%, but at least we had one. The second sign was when communism comes again. Now, if you read the papers, watch TV, you can see the effect of socialism and communism, pushing its agenda even through the United States. So we can see signs of that happening already, and it's going to get a lot worse. And the last sign was that the Pope would return from a trip from Moscow, and afterwards there would hostilities break out in Europe. Now, I also get asked a lot, well, how are we supposed to know which Pope she's talking about? Because, interestingly enough, we have 2 popes that are alive right now. But I always stress to people, you have to look at their title. And Benedict XVI's title is Pope Emeritus, emeritus from the Latin. And that means that is a retired position, okay? And that title that he holds is an honorary title. So Pope Francis was an elected pope. So while we have 2 popes, one is a retired honorary pope, and one is the actual elected pope. So I just wanted to clarify that portion of it. Now, with the warning itself, it starts with a physical sign. So the first thing is, Conchita described it as 2 stars. It looked like 2 stars that collide in the sky, but nothing falls. And that's an important fact, because people keep sending me predictions of stars that are going to crash. And I said, remember, she said, it looks like 2 stars. But she also said nothing falls. So if two actual stars crashed, there would be debris and damage, obviously, on Earth. So it may or may not be two stars. It may just appear to be two sources of light that collide and cause this explosion. Next, everything stops. There'll be a suspension of time. So literally everything on Earth, every machine will stop, every person will stop, everything comes to a complete halt. It's that time that God is going to let you see your soul as he sees it at that very moment, at the state of your soul right then and there. And this is what Conchita called a correction of conscience. And it has other titles I've heard on the internet, but that's the term I like. Because what is God trying to do? He is trying to correct your conscience. He's trying to correct your sins. Another interesting thing is you're going to see all of the sins that you've committed in your life. And one of the things people ask me is, well, I've gone to confession. These are confessed sins. I won't see these. And I unfortunately have to correct them. And this comes from Conchita, not from me, that God is going to show you all the sins because you don't understand the gravity of the offense to God. So I can't imagine what God feels if I use foul language, or if I steal, or if I murder. I don't know what the gravity of the sin is. No one does. But so you will see the gravity of all those sins. And you'll also see the chances that you missed in life to do good and passed up on it. And Conchita said you should always do frequent confession. And I've asked her about this a lot, and I said, is that going to help me if I'm going to see my sins anyhow? While I didn't get a direct answer, I got the impression, and this is really my impression, that those confessed sins are going to be dealt with less harshly than the sins that were not confessed. So confession is very important before. The second event is called the miracle. And what this is in a time period, which we don't have the exact time, but sometime after the warning. Initially, Mary Lowley had said it was going to be within a year of the warning. But later on, she did specifically say to a priest, it's going to happen in the same year. So we know that. So the warning and miracle happen in the same year. And the miracle is going to be a sign from God to act as proof of the warning that you received. And it's going to be the greatest miracle he's ever performed. So this is a confirmation that the warning you received is from God. You didn't imagine it. And this miracle is undeniably from God. It can't be man-made. Now, there are a lot of details that go into when the miracle is going to happen. And I'd like to read them so that, again, there's no mistake or no misunderstanding. So Conchita knows the date of the miracle. And in 1966, she was summoned to the Vatican. And after a 2.5-hour conversation in an interview with the Pope's people, she was finally brought in to see the Pope, and she gave him the date of the miracle. So the Vatican has the date of the miracle. That's important. Conchita is going to reveal the date of the miracle 8 days in advance. So now you can see why God maybe has waited so long for this to happen, because now with the advent of the internet, I literally can reach out and inform the world, and every news source available and every TV source available in a moment's notice. And I'm going to announce, once Conchita calls me, I'm going to announce that date on my Garabandal page, which we'll talk about later. It's going to happen on a Thursday evening between the 8th and 16th of April at 8:30 p.m. Spanish time. It will happen. Now, we talked about Mary Lowly said the miracle was going to happen March, April, May. Conchita said that, Mary Lowly. But through my research, I've narrowed it down to the month of April, and here's how. In 1986, Conchita did an interview with Father Gustavo Morales, and she said, it's not going to happen in May. That's all I'm going to tell you. So you can take May out. And then in 1988, she did another interview with Harry Daly, who wrote a book on Garabandal, and she says, it's either April or May. So now, if you take the information from the two, it has to be April. It will happen on the feast of a young male martyr of the Eucharist, and that martyr is not Spanish. Right away, people suggested St. Tarsus as the martyr feast, but in researching his life, his feast day is August 15th. So it doesn't truly fit prophecy, because if the miracle happens in April, it has to be a martyr that was martyred in April. It will coincide with a great event in the church, but it will not be a feast day of the Lord or a Marian feast day. That's important. Conchita went on to say that it'll be visible to all in the village of Garabandal and the surrounding mountains. The sick who are present will be cured, and the incredulous will believe. It will be the greatest miracle that Jesus will have ever performed for the world. There won't be the slightest doubt that it comes from God. She also said that it will be able to be filmed and televised. So I'm hoping that through my 8-day notification to the media, they will hopefully be there. Conchita also said it's going to last about 15 minutes, this first portion of the miracle. And what's interesting is, after that, there's going to be a permanent sign. So it's almost a 2-stage miracle, where there's initial 15-minute or so event, and then it's going to be followed by a permanent sign. And I've researched for decades now, trying to find out what this is. And there's very little information. There was only one quote by Conchita on April 11th of 1963. And she said it was a luminous cloud by day and a cloud of fire by night. And that's interesting, because if you know a little bit about Old Testament history and the book of Exodus, God used a column of smoke in the daytime and a column of fire at night for Moses to lead the Jews out of Egypt. So it might be the same type of symbol, which would be pretty interesting. The last event is called the Conditional Chastisement. And I always stress this. Mary said conditional chastisement. And what that means is, after the warning, after the miracle, God is going to give humanity a certain amount of time to react to these two events. Now, what does the world choose to do? Do they choose to repent and convert and turn their lives towards God and His will? Or do they ignore it? Or do some people start out, with the best of intentions of being good and holy, and still slowly start to slip away, which is a real possibility. And if in this period of time, which we really don't know how long it is, God is going to finally make a decision whether to implement this chastisement or punishment. Now, the girls actually had seen this in one of the ecstatic states on June 19th, 1962. God gave them a vision. Mary gave them a vision of the future chastisement, and it was called the Night of Screams. It so horrified the onlookers, the villagers, and the people who came to the village when they heard about the apparitions, that the entire town went to confession the next day. That's how terrified they were, just from the looks on the girls' faces. Now, there is very little detail, again, about what this punishment will be, but I did find one statement by Conchita where she says, it's worse than being enveloped by fire from above and below. Mary Lowley said to her, it looked like the rivers changed into blood and fire fell from the sky. So those are the only two descriptions that I have, but they're pretty horrendous.
What is the 3 days of darkness? And is that part of the Garabandal prophecies?
The 3 days of darkness was a prophecy by Blessed Anna Marie Tiagi in the early 1800s. And what she saw was these 3 days where literally the earth goes black and every demon is released and fire rains down from the sky. That was her description of it. Now, in Garabandal, the 3 days of darkness term was never used. It was always the chastisement. But if you compare the two descriptions, they sound pretty similar. So I would, my educated guess would be that chastisement is the 3 days of darkness.
What are your thoughts on the current coronavirus? And do you think it's in any way tied to any part of these prophecies?
Actually, I don't think it's tied directly to the prophecies, and I'll explain why. But I first want to say I do realize the importance of it. And what I believe it is, it's a wake-up call from God that things are going to change. This era that we're in is going to be one unlike any other. And this has kind of woken a lot of people up through the tribulations that they've suffered, through this pandemic. But if you listen to the way the girls described their vision of what's coming in this tribulation period before the warning, it doesn't really tie in to the coronavirus at all. So I'll read you just one description. Mary Lowley was asked about when this period comes, when communism comes again, just before the warning, what is it going to be like? When is it? And she said, when Russia will unexpectedly and suddenly overrun and overwhelm a great part of the free world. God does not want this to happen so quickly. In any case, the warning will come, and you will see that the Holy Mass cannot be celebrated freely anymore. Then it will be that the world will most need the intervention of God. She also went on to say in an interview in 1982 that this was going to be from persecution. She never said a virus or an illness. She said this is from a persecution. People are going to be forced to stop practicing their religion, go into hiding, and even to the point where priests are going to go into hiding. So if you use these descriptions from Mary Lowley, you can see it really doesn't relate to the virus situation. It's a much worse situation, and it's caused by persecution and not a virus.
Did the church investigate these apparitions when they were happening?
Yes, the current bishop at that time in 1961 was Bishop Fernandez. And his commission lasted from May of 61 through January of 62. And the problem was this. There were many problems, but this bishop remembered that in 1931, in June of 1931, in a town called Escazilla, I'm sorry, that's the wrong name. It's Esquiga. 2 children received the visions of the Blessed Mother. And these children went on to describe a lot of the same prophecies that Garabandal had. But during that time period, there was a civil war going on in Spain. And literally, it became church against state. And the fighting was so bad that the government actually disbanded the Jesuits and stopped them from promoting the apparitions. So this whole previous era from 1931 through 33, those visions, he thought, oh no, here we go again. I've got more children claiming that they're seeing the Blessed Mother. They're predicting the same things. I'm shutting this down. I'm going to stop it right from the beginning. So his investigation left a lot of holes in it because he never interviewed the girls. He never interviewed their parents. He never interviewed any of their relatives. He only interviewed people who disbelieved in the apparitions and recorded those. So now he assigns a priest to investigate the girls. The priest is so convinced that the apparitions are true that he resigns from the commission. And this priest's name was Del Gallo. And then he brings in doctors to try to discredit the apparitions. And the first doctor, Dr. Galan, says, these are just seizures and diseases due to an illness. The second group of doctors that he brings in tries to discredit the girl through tests, physical tests. So while the girls are in an ecstatic state, they pinch them, they pull their hair, they stick them with pins, they try to touch them with lit matches. They go as far as throwing sand in their eyes, trying to get them to blink, and also flash camera bulbs to try to get them to blink, which they can't. Two men can't physically lift a girl in an ecstatic state off the ground. It's almost like they're bolted to the ground. So now that the commission is getting so frustrated and to disprove this, that they literally take Conchita at 12 years old without her mother's permission, take her to another town where there's a beach. And for days, they verbally abuse her and threaten her, telling her, if you don't admit that this is a lie, you're going to jail. You're going to be put in an insane asylum, and your mother's going to jail. Imagine this poor girl, what she went through. Now, when that doesn't work, they cut off her hair. She had long braids, and they cut it all the way back up to her ears because they thought her hair had magical powers, and that's why she was so resilient and resistant. How sick, how sick. The last thing that they tried to do was hypnotize her. And the instant that the doctor tried to hypnotize her, the Blessed Mother stepped in and put her in an ecstatic state. And she was impervious to his hypnotize. So the last thing they did was they told her she's not going home until she signs a piece of paper. They put a blank piece of paper in front of her and tell her, you sign this, you go home. So you can imagine, 12-year-old girl, gone through what she was, the abuse, torture, if you will. She signs the piece of paper. But the interesting thing is that when she returns home, Mary appears to her and says, don't worry about whatever they put on the paper. She says, the day after the miracle, that paper will disappear. So that's an interesting little thing that's going to happen. Now, one of the other amazing things is you would think, okay, this report that he compiled was sent to the Vatican. It's on file somewhere. He was never sent to the Vatican. There's no record of it. Why? Because he couldn't back up the lies. So in the terms of trying to validate, in terms of trying to invalidate the apparitions, he wound up actually proving them to most of the people. And some of the subsequent bishops also tried. Now, this is an interesting quote from a Bishop Montes, who says, we know that after what Jesus Christ brought, there can be no more apparitions or revelations. Well, I believe after Jesus, we We've had Lourdes. We had Fatima. So it's an unusual statement to make. And the oddest thing that happened to this particular bishop was in March of 1965. He basically put out a note, an official note, saying that Mary is not appearing and there are no messages. Now, on April 25th, a Carmelite nun named Maria Miravalis warns him to rescind this letter. And he says no. And he says he's even going to go on TV with this announcement. And she warns him again. She says, better rescind this letter. She says, or it could mean your demise. And the bishop goes ahead, goes on TV, makes the announcement. And on May 8th, he dies in a car crash. And one of the unusual things is the people who attested to seeing this car crash said his hands were blackened. So that's interesting, that he refused to recant that story. Now, the priest that I told you about, who was assigned by the commission in the beginning to disprove the apparitions, Father Del Gallo, later on, he becomes the bishop. So in 1987, he starts a whole new investigation from 87 through 91. And then that report is finally sent to the Vatican. So now the Vatican has, at least on record, one official report, and they have the date of the miracle. Many people say, why hasn't the church approved this already if they have that information? And they kind of hedging their bet a little bit by saying, we have the date of the miracle. If everything happens on the date of the miracle, like you said it would, we'll approve it. Well, by that time, most people won't heed their approval.
Can you describe some of the supernatural phenomena that happened to the girls during some of these investigations?
Sure. Well, the first thing we talked about was the rosary, that the girls could actually recite the rosary. So that was one of the first things. I described earlier that when they would fall on these very jagged, large rocks. There'd be no injury, no pain shown. Also, there'd be no blood drawn on their bodies. So there was no indication. One of the most amazing things was when the townspeople started to believe that Mary was appearing, they started to bring religious objects that they wanted her to kiss. Because initially the girls were giving her rocks. And she said, I would really rather kiss, sacramental objects, not rocks. So people started to bring rosaries and scapulas and wedding rings. And it became so overwhelming that they had to put out a table, and people just piled all of the rosaries and rings and sacramentals on this table. And the girls were able to lift them up one at a time for Mary to kiss. And then, without even looking at the people looking up at her, they were able to walk back those sacramentals to the correct person, which was amazing. And this went on for years and never a long case. I happened to have with me, one of the things people started to bring was Bibles and missals also. And Mary would take the Bibles and missals, prayer missals, and she would fan the pages and kiss them. So later on, they had the idea of cutting up the missals into small, tiny pieces of paper and enclosing them in small medals. And I happen to have one with, I'll try to hold it up so that you can see it. But this is actually, the paper in the center was actually kissed by the Blessed Mother. Some of the other things that the girls did that were phenomenon, again, was all of the tests from the doctors, of the pinching, the needles, the lit matches, the sand in the eyes, flashing a camera, trying to make them blink. They weren't able to blink. But probably one of the most profound things that happened was that it's called the Little Miracle. And in July of 62, St. Michael announced that in 15 days, the Blessed Mother was going told him that Conchita would receive communion on her tongue. So those 15 days go by, and Conchita is in an ecstatic state waiting. Hundreds of people there, 2 rolling cameras, still cameras. Her tongue is out, and all of a sudden, a luminous Eucharist appears on her tongue. And this is recording. You can see it on YouTube. You just put in Garabandal, the little miracle. You'll actually see it happen. So it's unrefutable. You can't deny that she didn't hide this. Some people say, oh, she hid it. If you know anything about having the Eucharist in your mouth, you can't hold it there for hours. It's impossible. And she was there for hours. Also, in 1961, Mary's voice was recorded. And unfortunately, when the townspeople heard her voice, they had it recorded. They came back to the village to replay it, played once, and then never again. And her words were, "I won't speak." So I guess she has a little sense of humor. And Conchita was also given a Polaroid camera. And there is actually on my website, if you come, there is a Polaroid picture. It's at a distance, and it's more of an image, I would say, like in the clouds. But you can see a white lit outline of the Blessed Mother, but it's in like a clouded area. But there is still physical evidence that she took that picture.
Has Conchita ever been interviewed by the Vatican?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, she had 2 interviews, one in January 1966 and one in February of 1968. And the first one was with Cardinal Alfredo Ottavani. And this was for 2.5 hours. He grilled her. And he was so pleased and believed so much that he set up a meeting with Pope Paul VI the next day. He thought it was that important that the Pope himself see Conchita, hear her story, and judge for himself. And at that meeting was the Pope, Conchita's mother, and the Pope's doctor, Dr. Mede. And at the end of the meeting, Pope Paul VI said, "Conchita, I bless you, and with me, the whole church blesses you." The second meeting in 68, again, was with the Congregation of the Doctrine. And in that, it was a secret meeting. It was held by Cardinal Ratzinger, who became Pope Benedict XVI. So that started his interest in Garabandal, and he actually started reading and looking into the validity of Garabandal through books. But he was a believer, Garabandal. There's no official judgment yet, as I stated before, other than this one declaration. Now, the church has 3 different categories when you're dealing with apparitions. So I'll read them to you so the people understand what are the conditions and what is it called. So the first one is called constat the supernaturalite. And it is certain that the events are of a supernatural origin. The second one is called constat de non-supernaturalite. It's certain that the events are not of supernatural origin. The third one, which is what Garabandal is classified as, is called non-constat de supernaturalite. It is not certain that the events are of a supernatural origin. So what the Vatican did basically is, rather than commit before the miracle date, they left room that the apparitions could still be promoted, because there is no condemnation of this apparition. A lot of people are confused about that. And as a matter of fact, in August of 91, Bishop Del Val said that the message of Garabandal was not only important, but theologically correct. And his report was sent to the Vatican also. And even as late as Um, 2017 through 2015, Bishop Zamora celebrated two masses in Garabandal and actually asked to carry and kiss one of the crucifixes, large crucifixes that Mary kissed during the apparitions. So those are pretty good affirmations that you can see the transformation of the Pope, bishops, from the early bishops to the later bishops, are more believing.
Have these apparitions had any backing of any other popes or saints?
Sure. So we have Pope Paul VI, the initial Pope who believed. John Paul II, who I met in 1996, was a huge believer in Garabandal. His successor, Pope Benedict XVI, also was a believer. So that's pretty amazing to have those three popes, especially John Paul II, who is undeniable, not only as a pope, but he's a saint. And now Pope Paul is also a saint, Pope Paul VI. But if you want to go into other saints, the star saint is obviously Saint Padre Pio. It's undeniable his spiritual judgment and wisdom. So if you have him as a believer, as a vocal believer, that's pretty good. Backing him up is Saint Mother Teresa. And it's an interesting story that she was such a believer and met Conchita so many times that she is actually one of Conchita's daughter's godmother. So that's pretty good affirmation if Mother Teresa is your daughter's godmother and a believer in Garabandal. And then there are other saints, Jose Maria Escriva and Maria Maravallis, and there are many more. But it's a pretty good hit list of popes and saints. And I can't think of another apparition that has had this much confirmation through spiritually wise people. I can't think of another.
Absolutely. Now, there is some confusion about the number of popes until the end of the times. Can you talk about that and clarify that?
Yeah, this happened because of somewhat of a disagreement between Conchita and her mother. Her mother had heard what Conchita said, and I'm going to read an exact quote so that people understand what caused the confusion. Okay. Sorry. In response to one of her mother's questions, Conchita responded that Our Lady had actually said that there were 4 more popes, but that she was not counting one of them. When Conchita's mother heard that, she strictly forbade Conchita to repeat that again, as her mother feared that there would be erroneous interpretations and much gossip. People might wrongly believe that one of the popes might be a false or bad pope. During that conversation with her mother, Conchita also said that Our Lady told her that one of the popes would have a very short reign. So you can see where the confusion came from when she said 3 popes. And the reason she said 3 popes is because her mother said, don't say there was 4, because one of them might be bad. It wasn't that one was bad, one died. John Paul I died 33 days after his reign. So he was the Pope Mary was referring to. So people want to know about this end of times. And again, Mary was speaking about, I'm using the number of popes to indicate that time period. It's not about who's Pope. It's not about really the number of popes, but I'm giving you an indication of when that era is starting. So you had, after the death of Pope John the 23rd, you had Paul VI, John Paul I, John Paul II, Benedict XVI. So now we're in that era. So people say, well, why didn't she say Pope Francis or give a name? Mary doesn't have to give a name. She gave you an exact, pretty exact time period by indicating after those four popes, that's the era. So people always want to tie it to who was pope or how many popes. It has nothing to do with that. She's just giving an indication of an era. And that's the era we're in, because this is the era that we're going to experience the warning and the miracle. Again, people talk about the end of the times. Now, Conchita said the end of the times, not the end of time. So people also confuse, this is not the end of the world. It's just the end of an era and the beginning of another era. So I want to clarify that. And back in 2015, Pope Francis declared it a Jubilee year of mercy. So really, he's saying, I'm declaring this new era, an era of mercy. So you can actually physically see now, he's the Pope of this era that Mary referred to, and he's actually coming out and declaring a Jubilee year of mercy. So I see, to me, that's an era ending and the start of a new era. And what's going to happen? The warning. And what is the warning? God's greatest act of mercy for our souls. So I think it all ties together that in 2015, he declared it a Jubilee year of mercy. And we're also facing the warning, I think, in the near future. So I think that's an interesting tie of the time period.
And to piggyback off of that, one of the most common questions you get is about the miracle. And you've already went into great depth, but just to reiterate, how will we know when the miracle will take place?
Okay, so the first thing is that we have the warning. We need that as a marker in time. So I've talked about the three events that'll happen preceding the warning, that period of tribulation. Then the warning happens. And then if you take what I surmised in my studies, that the miracle will happen in April, and it happens in the same year as the warning, it kind of leads to the conclusion that the warning should happen in January, February, or March, followed by the warning, followed by the miracle in April. So you have that time period. Also, you're going to get 8 days notice from Conchita as to when the miracle is. And hopefully the media will pick up on that and help me to spread that message as quickly as possible.
There's so much information. And as you said earlier, you have close to, I think, 600 files on Garabandal. And for people to learn more about the apparitions and to keep updated on current Garabandal developments, what do you suggest?
I'd like them to come to my Facebook page. It's called The Message of Garabandal. Again, it's the only site that I know of that's interactive every day, all day. I'll answer any of your questions, no matter how easy or how hard or how harsh they are. Some people also use Facebook Messenger because they don't want to post their question in public. You can send it to me in private, and I'll answer it privately. Same day. You don't have to wait too long. Usually I'm online quite a bit during the day. And one of the interesting things, like I said before, is my page, because it was agreed by Conchita, it's the only page on the internet that has contact with her. So not only will you get Garabandal facts, you'll get personal stories and quotes by Conchita. I've known her for a long time now, almost 30 years. So I relate a lot of our lunch meetings, phone calls, sayings, whatever I feel like posting. And I believe my site was the only site in the entire world in March released a statement by Conchita, a public statement. I called her and asked her to comment on the pandemic and her reaction to people's fear. And she did release a statement to me for humanity. So that's the only time that she's spoken probably since the 80s. So that's one of the great benefits of my page is not only do you get a wealth of Garabandal information and facts and everything I back up with where I've read it, where I've seen it, a video, who said it, but you get interesting stories about Conchita's life, get her current thoughts if she likes to say something, and gives you a chance to also interact with the other members because everybody has interesting points of view.
Fantastic. And I can testify as one of the members of your group, every day, the information and the photos that you release, it's truly incredible. And so what we're going to do, Glenn, at the bottom of this video, I'm going to link your Facebook page so everybody has access to that. And I can't thank you enough for doing this. I know how valuable your time is. So thank you so much, Glenn.
Thank you, Reagan. This has been an awesome opportunity to get out our Blessed Mother's message and spread it around the world.
Absolutely. And so I'm confident that we're going to be seeing a lot of new faces in your group. So here's hoping.
God bless. Thank you.